Hey guys, so we're looking at Greek culture part two. So this is the rest of those notes. So you'll continue filling in those guided notes. Again, those just stay in that folder in your on your Google Drive, and this is a journal entry. So that's how that'll kind of work. So here we go. Warriors. So we're continuing our kind of compare and contrast of Athens and Sparta. We talked about slaves, we talked about aristocrats, we talked about commoners. Now we're going to talk about warriors and women and artists. So in Athens, every young male received training, but you only had to assemble during wartime. They had a really, really incredible navy. That was kind of what they were known for. But basically, if Athens wasn't actively at war, then they didn't really have like a standing army. They would just kind of muster everybody when it was necessary. This is similar to kind of how like South Korea does it. So every male in South Korea has to enlist basically for a short amount of time. They have to like basically fulfill their like duty in terms of joining the army or the military for at least a couple of years. So Athens is the same way. Like everybody receives training, but you only need them for when the times they're actively at war. Sparta basically felt like they were at war all the time. So their entire life revolved around military service. They were sent to military schools at age 7. They became a soldier at age 20. You couldn't live with your family till you were 30. So even though you're probably married by the time you're 30, you're probably married really in your early 20s, maybe even before you're 20 in ancient Greece. But you lived in the barracks up until the time you were 30, and many of them didn't even leave after that point. So the reason why they do that, right, is they want the military to be your family. They don't want you worried about those people at home, because odds are that you're going to spend a lot of time away from those people. You're going to spend a lot of time kind of deployed or out at war or whatever. And they didn't want them focused on their family at home. They wanted them focused on their family that was the military. So that's kind of how Sparta worked. Many people served into their 60s, which was ancient by Greek standards. That means that you're like serving in the military up until like you're like 70 or 80. And yeah, so everything revolved around military service. That was their sole focus. And again, if you've seen the movie 300, you'll understand that. So artists and writers in Athens, they thought you were inspired by the gods or by these demigods called the Muses. So you would often have a wealthy patron. They would be in charge of paying for you to live while you like did the important job of writing and all this kind of stuff. And you were held in honor. Basically, you would get somebody important to take care of you, and you would just create. And because Athens was a center of culture and literature and drama and all that kind of stuff, everybody thought you were amazing. Sparta, I don't know if they ever created anything. They were too busy just like murdering their neighbors to really worry about creating stuff. So they don't really have much for their artists and writers. Women. So life as a Greek woman was not pleasant. So in Athens, you were basically a slave. You had no education or equality. You were confined to your home, but oftentimes, so like you wouldn't really see your husband. So you would make dinner, right, and you would serve your husband his dinner. But odds are he didn't really want to eat with you. He wanted to eat with his friends. So you would serve them their meal in another room, and then you would eat somewhere else entirely by yourself. You were often a lot younger than your husband as well. So women were often married off around age 14 to 16. And men often weren't married until they were 20 or later. So you have this like 5-10 year age gap. You can't own property. You can't inherit. And so everything goes to your husband or to your sibling, your brothers, if you have any. So yeah, it was a rough go in Athens. In Sparta, however, they actually had a lot more freedom. So you didn't get any formal military school like the boys did starting at age 7, but you were physically trained like the men. You were allowed to own businesses and land. You often ran your own house. And part of that is just because a lot of the men in Sparta just weren't there most of the time. And if their women were like Athenian women, where they weren't allowed to do anything, they weren't allowed to own anything, then your whole city state would just collapse while the men were away at war, right? All that would be left are like old men, and everybody else would be gone, and the women wouldn't have any idea what to do. So because the men didn't live in their homes until they were 30, and didn't really care about the day-to-day stuff, women ran all of that and actually enjoyed a fair amount of freedom. So if you're a lady, Sparta was definitely the place to be. Your husband will probably die in war, or come back maimed or whatever, but you have freedom. So, trade-offs. Religion. And I think this is the part of Greek culture that is the most interesting, the most fun. And the one that you guys probably know the most about is about their kind of Greek gods. So there's no book, right? There's no commandments. There's no rules, really. Greeks weren't big on rules. There was no like Bible. There's no sacred text no Quran, no Old Testament, no Torah, nothing like that kind of tells you what you should be doing. Instead, you have 12 major gods that were called the Olympians, and there's basically just a bunch of stories about them. And a lot of times they would sacrifice, so they would burn offerings to these gods. So burnt offerings you would slaughter like an ox or a cow or a pig or something, and you would burn the fat and the bones for the gods, because they don't really eat, but they like the smell of roasting meat. So you'd burn that for them, and then you would eat it. So you would usually pick a god that you worshipped closely. So like everybody worships Zeus because he's the god of all gods, but a lot of times you would have like a secondary one that was important to you personally. So if you were a shepherd, you probably worshipped Hermes because he was the god of shepherds. If you were a farmer, you probably worshipped the goddess Demeter. If you were a hunter, you probably worshipped the goddess Artemis, like things like that. So you usually had like a secondary god that you would also worship. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about these guys, so you guys can actually be doing some research on them. But so Zeus has 3 brothers. So it's him, Poseidon, and Hades. They are the 3 oldest, and Hera is his sister and also his wife. There's a lot of that in Greek gods. Siblings just don't really matter all that much when you're divine, I guess. So so Zeus is married to his sister, and Zeus is the youngest, but he's also the most powerful. So Zeus, Hades, Poseidon, and Hera were born from this Titan who kept eating his children because he'd heard this prophecy that his kid was going to overthrow him. So he's like, oh, I'll just eat them and then it won't be a big deal. But his wife was like, not this one. So Zeus, she kept, and she instead wrapped some rocks in like a baby blanket and like, here's your kid. And then he ate the rocks and never knew. So Zeus like grew up and then came and murdered his dad. And so when that happened, Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon were like, all right, we're going to rule everything. So let's split up this world. So they drew lots, and Zeus won. So he wanted the sky, and Poseidon came in second. So he's like, I guess I'll take the sea. And then Hades lost. He came in third, and he's like, I guess I get the underworld. So he's kind of sad about that. Apollo and Artemis are twins, and they are children of Zeus and a woman. There was a lot of that too. Zeus ran around a lot on Hera, which she wasn't thrilled about, but what are you going to do? And she actually made a giant snake chase Apollo and Artemis's mom all over the place while she was pregnant so that she couldn't give birth, but she like found this island that Hera couldn't get to or whatever. So Apollo and Artemis are twins. He's the god of the sun, of music, of like medicine, and he drives the chariot of the sun across the sky. He's also really good at archery. Artemis, his sister, is the goddess of the moon. And she told Zeus that she wants to stay a virgin forever. That's all she wanted. And she just wants to be able to hunt and enjoy herself. So Zeus said, sure, you can be a virgin for forever. And he gives her this really nice bow. So she just, hunts and murders dudes sometimes. There's a great story about a guy who was just, in the forest, and he was hunting, and he stumbled upon Artemis naked, bathing like in a river. And, he's just a dude. So he watched because she was so pretty. And Artemis saw him and got so pissed that she turned him into a deer. And then he was eaten by his own dogs. So that's what happens. Athena is a fun one. I forget exactly how, but she ends up like inside of Zeus. He swallows her or something. I don't know. Something weird happens. But he has this like horrible headache. So Hephaestus, the god over here, he's the god of the forge, like basically like cracks Zeus's head open with like a chisel, and out pops Athena, fully grown and in complete armor, like full mail. And that's Athena. So she's the goddess of wisdom and of war. So she's a fun one. Hera is Zeus's sister and wife. She's the goddess of marriage, which is ironic because her marriage is terrible, and it's basically her and Zeus fighting all the time because Zeus either is having sex with mortals, both consensual and non-consensually, and she gets pissy about it and then takes it out on the women because why wouldn't you? Demeter is the goddess of agriculture, right? So the goddess of corn and growing things and stuff like that. There's a fun story about her and her daughter Persephone that explains the seasons and why we have winter and why we have spring and summer. Aphrodite is the goddess of love. She is a weird one. She didn't really come from anything. She came because when Zeus murdered his Titan father, he lopped off his genitals and tossed them into the ocean. And then Aphrodite came from that. So she's the goddess of love and sex and all that kind of thing, which is fitting because she comes from severed genitals. Hermes is the god of messengers, of shepherds. He takes the souls of the dead down into the underworld. He's a fun one. He stole a bunch of cows like 6 hours after he was born, and he's like super smart and mischievous. He's probably the most entertaining of them. Poseidon is the god of the sea. He's a weird old dude. He's got a bunch of children. And yeah, so Artemis I already talked about with Apollo. Hephaestus is the god of the forge. He's also the ugliest one, and he's crippled because Hera, again, got mad at Zeus for having a baby. And when she saw Hephaestus, she saw he was so ugly that she just dumped his butt out of Olympus, and he like broke his legs when he landed. So he grew up all cripply. But he was such an amazing master of the forge and such an amazing blacksmith that they end up bringing him back anyway as an Olympian. And he forges Zeus's lightning bolts for him. Ares is the god of war. He sucks. So Aphrodite and Hephaestus are married, but Hephaestus is ugly and Aphrodite is gorgeous and also kind of lusty because she was born from genitals. So she and Ares have this like long ongoing affair that Hephaestus finds out about, and he tries to like publicly shame them, and it backfires on him terribly. But he's the god of war, and he just loves killing stuff. Hades is the god of the underworld, as we talked about, and Hestia is technically a goddess. She's not really in charge of much. She's in charge of the hearth, which is like the fire. But she's very different from the gods in that she is not prideful. She's very humble. And she doesn't really want anything special. She just wants to take care of people. So she's like the nice one. The rest of them are all kind of terrible in lots of ways. So they were just like people. So it's kind of the weird thing about how the Greeks saw their gods was that they weren't like paragons of virtue like we normally think of gods, especially in monotheistic cultures as opposed to like polytheistic. So polytheistic is the worship of a lot of gods. Monotheistic is the worship of one. So in a lot of monotheistic cultures, like in Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, you have an all-knowing, all-loving, all-benevolent God. And these gods were basically exactly like people, except for they lived forever. So they fought, they loved, they lied, they were jealous, they were petty, but they could live forever. So, they got to do that for a long time. Politics. So Athens is our first democracy. And it was pretty much a direct democracy. About a fifth of the population was allowed to participate. So if you were a citizen, if you were free, and if you were male, and if you were a landowner, so if you could do those four things, then you were allowed to participate. Women, slaves, foreigners, really poor people, you could not participate. So every year they had this thing called the Council of 500, and they would choose 500 citizens from that fifth of the population. And they were in charge of proposing laws, advising the assembly, creating laws, kind of governing the city for the year. It was a paid position. So even if you weren't very wealthy, you could actually still hold office, right? Which was kind of amazing, and something that helps with the equity. If only a fifth of your population can like participate in your democracy, it's probably not really all that equitable anyway, but this does help with the equity so that, you're getting people from all walks of life. So plays started at festivals for Dionysus, and he's the god of wine and drinking and partying. Dionysus is a fun one. And so at these festivals, people would compete for prizes. And if you won, you got a goat, which is just such a great gift. And then you would sacrifice the goat to the gods for your win so that they would continue to bless you with the talent that you already have. We have three great tragedy writers, Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, whose stuff survived because, like you see here at the bottom, we know that over 1,000 plays were written because we have records and things that talk about these plays. Only 31 exist in their entirety. And Oedipus Rex is one of them, so we get to read it. And it was written by Sophocles, that third one. You would have only a couple of actors, and they would wear these big, giant masks that had really exaggerated features that you could see from super far away. And they would play multiple parts and just kind of swap out the masks and that kind of thing. So 7 characteristics of drama. You'll have a quiz on this, so make sure we take good notes. So first off, it requires a lot of backstory. So like the Theban legend, which I'm going to be telling you guys very soon, is an example of that, where you have to know a lot about these characters before it starts in order for you to understand what's going on. The second characteristic is that they keep death and violence off stage. A lot of times they would do this either because, I'm not sure if it's because Greeks were squeamish and they just didn't like seeing that, or if it was because they just didn't have like the budget or the ability to like create these like massive battle scenes and stuff and to make it look good. So instead what they would do is number 3, they would use a messenger to tell you about what happened off stage. So you'd have characters run off and then a messenger would come on. They'd be like, oh my God, you guys, like this guy just totally murdered that other guy, or this big battle happened. Let me tell you about it in detail. So that's why messengers were very helpful. Time of action is continuous. So basically it happens in real time. So like, and it won't like skip ahead in time, or you won't like skip ahead 6 years or 5 years or anything like that. Basically, it'll kind of start and end in real time for the characters. So like Oedipus Rex takes place in the course of a day. Like Oedipus learns everything about himself in this course of one day. A lot of times they're based on either myth or history. So stories about the gods or about battles that have already taken place. And the main character's ethics and morals and how they think are what's really important. That's really what the Greek people cared about. They didn't really care about their physical traits or anything like that. They wanted to know what was important to them morally and ethically, and where they stood on those ideas. Okay, so that takes care of Greek drama. We'll be talking about the Theban legend a little bit later. And yeah, hope you guys have a great day. Bye.